Hello. In this module, we're going to discuss the authorization code flow in detail. This flow is one of the 4 OAuth 2.0 grant types. This flow is typically used with confidential clients or clients that can securely store the client ID in secret. This is really important. You have to protect your client ID in secret, and you should never share it with other developers. The main reason why you want to use the authorization code flow is if there is a client application that wants access to a third-party resource server, and you don't want to share the user's credentials with the client application. For example, let's say that you have an analytics client application that counts the number of messages you post to your Google account. You don't want to share your credentials with the client application, so the app lets you log in with your Google account, and then you allow the analytics app to access your Google account data. I'll start by describing the actors involved in the authorization code flow. There's the user agent, typically a web browser, the client application, the authorization server, which is Apigee Edge, the authentication server, which is the login app, and the resource server. Now let's talk about the auth code flow in detail. The user starts the process by opening the client application and clicking a link to log in. For example, you've probably seen this when you open an application and it has a button for you to log in with Google. When the user clicks the link to log in, that sends an authorize request to Apigee Edge. Apigee validates the client ID and redirect URI, and then redirects the client application to the login application. The client application understands that this is a redirect request and opens the user agent, typically a web browser, and sends the request there. The user agent sends a GET request to the login application for the login form, and that form is returned to the user agent. Notice that at this point, the user is not interacting with the client application, but with the user agent. The user enters their credentials, submits them to the login application, and then it validates them. Next, the user has to provide consent, which means that the user is granting the client application access to its data. After the user grants access to the client application, it sends a post request with the client ID, the redirect URI, and scopes to Apigee Edge. Apigee validates the client ID and redirect URI and then generates an authorization code. It sends a redirect request with the authorization code as a query parameter to the login application. The login application forwards the request back to the user agent, which forwards the request to the client application. The client app extracts the authorization code from the query parameter and sends a post request to the token resource and includes the client ID and secret along with the authorization code. Now do you see why this grant type requires confidential clients? Because it has to send the client ID and secret to Apigee Edge. The client ID and secret must be stored securely and not shared with anyone else. Apigee validates the client ID and secret and the authorization code, and then returns the access token to the client application. At this point, the authorization code flow is complete. Next, we'll talk about what happens after the client application receives the access token. Once the client application has the access token, it can use it to access the resource server. So now that you understand the authorization code flow, let's look at how you configure the OAuth v2 policy. The OAuth policies that we are going to review next should be created in an OAuth proxy, and each policy should be in its own flow. Use the generate authorization code operation to generate an auth code. Then you can also set the auth code expiry time. When the client application sends the post token request, the OAuth v2 policy should be configured as shown. Notice that the grant type is set to authorization code, and the location of where to find the grant type in the request is also specified. The last policy that you need to protect your API from unauthorized access is the verify access token policy. This policy should be included on all the proxies that need to be protected. The client application should send the access token in the authorization header as a bearer token. Now you have a thorough understanding of the authorization code flow, and you can use it to protect your APIs if the use case arises. If you have any additional questions, please post them on our community and review our documentation for more details. Thanks for watching.